1989. I did want to come. I really wanted to come, but I wasn't allowed to. But I remember it to this day. Did you go after the wall came down? Did you go before and after? Yes. Eisenhower.
Communist. We had to pay the earth to stay in the Hotel Elephant in Weimar, which was Hitler's favourite hotel, by the way, and in Weimar, and went through Eisenach. We were the only Western.
Was this in 89 or 90?
89, in December, 22nd or something, when the border, just a day before the border was opening, 21st.
You were in there?
We went through the conventional way before the border opened. The border opened, I think, the day after, and our family solicitor tried to cross. Queues of people getting in for free, but they couldn't get in because there were queues. I mean, it was
getting into Germany.
Well, basically queuing up. I think there must have been some kind of border at that time, but it was basically open, and we had to go through a commie woman with a moustache who charged us a fortune for staying. Had to pre-book. This was 19 December, just before the day that the border opened in 1989, and we went into Eisenach, and we were the only VW. All the rest were these
Travis
and Vartis and all the rest.
Did they look at you with contempt?
No, they did. You had the feeling that you were, after the Second World War, sort of an army of liberation. It was just extraordinary, because there were no tourists, no Western cars, just very old-fashioned cobblestones, and you had milk pails left out outside houses for filling up or whatever they were. Just so old-fashioned. It was like going back to 1940 again. It was extraordinary, as if communism had done nothing. And it was just a very strange experience of going back in time.
How did they treat you?
Oh, they looked, I mean, they treated us very courteously, and met a communist chappie going around the Wartburg, which was
the posh car.
The Wartburg is actually, well, it's called the Wartburg because it was made in Eisenach. The Wartburg is the castle where Luther stayed for a while, tried to escape the Catholics. The Wartburg is the castle in Eisenach. But we went to the Wartburg and we met a guide who was a die-hard commie member who'd never been outside East Germany, ever. And he had no idea. And he had no idea what was going on. He didn't think of unity. He thought Weimar was a wonderful place. And, actually it was through sulfuric forests, sulfuric smell of sulfur brown coal. Right at Weimar in the evening, no lights, no lighting on at all. Smell of sulfur, nothing open except the Hotel Elephant, which smells of sulfur.
What is sulfur?
Sulfur is a smell of, I don't know where it came from, it's the mines.
What were they mining?
Well, they're digging up brown coal.
Yeah.
It was the industry at the time. But we saw Stasi, turned out to be Stasi, because they were there watching us for breakfast. They were there patrolling the streets the next day.
Did you recognise them?
Well, no, we didn't know at the time they were Stasi. There were two strange men when we arrived. We were the only people to arrive in the hotel, and there were a couple of strange chaps watching us.
How do you know they were watching you?
Because they were hanging around watching us. But the next day at breakfast, they were watching us, and they were sitting at a table, the only people in the restaurant watching us. And we saw the buggers again and watching us in the Schillerstrasse. in the main street of
Mm.
Weimar.
Were they following you?
They were Stasi. They were Stasi.
Well,
And in
why
fact,
did they
we know they were Stasi because we went to a bar, the only pub opened. I remember asking somebody where the nearest pub was in broken German, and they said,
Mm.
led us to the bar, and it was a kind of bar, and everyone was there. The Stasi, we saw them, the Stasi on one side, and two people were still there. And
Following you?
Yeah, and then there were some foreign students on the other side. They were all laughing at the Stasi, and they said, they're finished, they're finished. And they were laughing at them.
Were the Stasi being paid for this?
Well, the regime was coming to an end, and you could sense in the pub that the people were contemptuous and knew that change was afoot. So basically they were joking and laughing. And
They wouldn't have dared 10 years ago.
I wouldn't have imagined they would have done it a month ago.
No.
But because, the borders, they knew a thing. They had no...
Had the eastern borders already started?
No, they hadn't. That was the day before they'd opened. And I don't know that they even knew.
So how did they know?
Well, I don't think they knew.
So how did they sense it?
I think they sensed that. I think they sensed that the days were numbered. But we stayed overnight at that pub. We went to the pub, had a few drinks. They were all laughing openly at the communists at the other end. And there were two bars. Basically, the communists were at one end, and all the new people were at the other, laughing at the communists. And we went home. The next morning, we went out to Xmas2, and we went to a butcher's, and there was just queues of people for no meat. And we saw the same two people in the hotel in the street again. And then we went to the Museum, and there was an old woman there, and I gave her a Deutschmark as a tip. And she burst into tears because she'd never received so much money in her life. Because normally the Ostmark was 1/100th of a Deutschmark. So she thought she was rich.
How much was a Deutschmark?
It was much more in those days than an Ostmark. It was valuable. And anyway...
And was she burst into tears?
Yeah, she did. Literally, Gina was there. And that was...
Did you feel embarrassed?
I didn't know what was going on, basically. And then I looked out of the window and I said, why all these people with uniforms out there? There were these Russians with these stupid epaulets and red stupid hats, big
Yes.
hats.
Woolen hats.
No, caps, but army caps, but they were too big for their heads with the red things in front. And I said to the old woman, what are all these people out there? And she was panicking, and she thought it was the Russian armies moved in because they were expecting the Russian army to move in. And I was having tipped her one motion to the next, and there was a tank regiment at Jena. We saw them all because we travelled to Jena. We saw the Russians in the tank regiments going to Jena, just on the road, and they were all expecting the Russians to move in as they always have in the past. There was an air of freedom, but they thought it was not going to last. But,
so what the people were conglomerating?
People, you didn't see anything when you went into the streets or in the hotel. In the hotel, you were on your own.
Was this just before the wall came down?
This was the day before the wall came down.
And you were there?
And yes,
And all the Eastern Europeans.
I was there. The next day the wall came down. But basically we didn't see any tourists coming into Weimar at the time. But we saw all the sights. We saw East Germany as it existed. And we saw the Russian troops there. And we saw a combination of optimism and fear combined. Because nobody knew what was going on. They didn't have access to the Western press.
What did the Western press...
the Western press at the time, before we left...
Were they aware of what was happening?
Yes, the Western press, when we left, this is why we went to East Germany for the last time, to see what it was like, was full of unity as only a matter of months away.
But the people living there didn't know that.
No, they didn't.
So what actually brought about unity in the end?
What brought about unity was nothing to do with the people, it was to do with Gorbachev and the KGB in Russia deciding that they didn't want to have this empire anymore, and they more or less gave it away.
So why did people gather by the gate?
the Berlin Wall took place very early on this revolutionary movement in November 2008, 1989, and that's far too much brandy. That's what you poured it as if it was wine. You'll be completely drunk drinking that. You don't want brandy like that. Brandy is not to be drunk like wine. It's to be drunk as a...
It's got black things swimming in it.
Well, I don't know. That's,
Look. It's clearly
well, that's
not
because
right.
of your wine. That's probably
No,
sediment of your
it's
wine.
not. There
Look,
we go. No, continue.
that's a wine glass. I can give you a brandy glass if you want one.
Continue.
No, it was just a very interesting period in history. But it was a revolution from the top. It didn't
So why did they all gather there?
gather? Nobody was gathering. The gathering took place in Leipzig and other parts of the world. We were in Weimar.
No, but why were they at the wall? Why did they know it was coming down?
Oh, because at that time the communist regime was still intent on it continuing its...
But why did people gather at the wall?
Because they didn't know at the time whether the wall was going to last or not. They did not have... They had a sense of freedom, but they did not know, as we knew in the West.
So why did they get the sense of freedom?
They could sense that there was inertia and a lack of authoritarianism in suppressing their ridicule and their street demonstrations. They could sense that they were getting away with it. But at the same time, they feared that
Repercussions.
they feared at any time the Russian tanks would move in, as they always have done. Back in the 50s in Hungary, back in the 60s in Czechoslovakia. And you had the sense, combined sense at the time, of liberation plus trepidation. You had the combined sense. We in the West happened to know through our newspapers that the West were colluding with the East, with Russia, in actually creating the breakdown of the communist system. All the people fleeing the boundaries, the borders from Hungary, fleeing out of Czechoslovakia, fleeing out of Poland into free countries, which was tolerated at the time, was a start of something, and indeed it was. It was a collusion between the highest elements of the
People in
KGB.
Germany knew that they could get out, so then when people started finding out more, then more people started gathering.
But from the political point of view, they obviously didn't know what was happening. They didn't know, they did not have the Western press as we had. So when I said to the communist official in the Wartburg that there would be unity within a year,